after the interview, they had an essay. And my essay was all about the SAU mission statement and how much I liked it. And then someone corrected me and said that wasn't the SAU mission statement.
Oh, there you go.
I can't remember who told me. I really can't. Oh, yeah, board member, not no likely.
Said it wasn't the SAU mission statement.
Yeah. You live stream, just staying, you can send, we are in the live stream, that right there. It says live for us.
My friend just posted, after careful thought, I've decided to take the Albuquerque Balloon Festival and the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade off my bucket list.
Yeah, I think everything, we're going live on YouTube, we got a screen up here. We're good to go? People are in, yeah. All right. Good evening, folks. Sorry for the delay, technical difficulties. Our first goal in the strategic plan will be to make sure that we have state-of-the-art display and communication technology ready to go at a moment's notice. Probably something we'll try to achieve by year 5. So we've been looking forward to this night to have a chance to share work that's been going on really over 3 years now. So what we're going to do this evening is we're going to take you through a presentation, sort of sharing what we've done so far, explain what the structures are that we have at work right now that are attempting to develop the strategic plan, and then sort of where the points are for the public to become involved. And we'll end with an exit survey. We hope to get some input. Input from our stakeholders has informed the process to date quite a bit, and we'll share how. But first, I'd like to sort of introduce my my partners in this enterprise. And if we can just go around the table and we'll do introductions.
Hi, I'm Rick Johnson. I'm the Dresden chair.
I am Ben Keeney, the Hanover School Board Chair.
Jay Badham, superintendent.
Tom Camden, the Norwich School Board Chair.
And right there, I come as director of the student services in the school district.
So each of our board chairs and rep have been working as their other job has been to chair our subcommittees for the strategic plan. And so we have an academic subcommittee that Ben chairs, and Rhett and Lisa Christie have chaired the student support subcommittee. Tom has handled facilities, and Rick has done organizational effectiveness. And so when we get a little further into this, they'll each share with you where each of those subcommittees are so far. But I just wanted to, I'm going to try to share my screen, and hopefully our technology will cooperate. We have tonight, it looks like we've got 24 participants now. That's great. And we have a few folks here in the library with us. That's not quite as many people as even stood on the design team for the portrait of a graduate, but this is, we really are hoping to get more and more public participation. I'm going to take you through really quickly a set of slides that we use to explain this process internally. At each juncture so far of the work that we've been doing, we as committee members have thought, oh, we need more input. It's a lot to put on the shoulders of a handful of people to try to determine the direction of an entire school system for the next 5 years. But we're doing it. So we're working on a strategic plan right now because of a couple of reasons. We hope to develop a portrait of a graduate, or what we're coming to now regard as portrait of a learner, that serves the purpose of sort of our vision that centers our work. And then the board will establish and approve ultimately some broad goals and some metrics, some outcome indicators, so that we know whether we've achieved those goals or not. It'll be the job of folks in the schools to develop the strategies to get us to those goals, and more on that shortly. So the why of this process, not only is it just good practice for any organization to have some idea of what its purpose is, where it's going, what activities it needs to undertake in order to achieve its goals and purpose. We have a statutory obligation as a board in the state of New Hampshire anyway, to fulfill our obligations as a board to develop strategies and goals for moving forward in the future. And in Vermont, there's a similar requirement for boards to engage in comprehensive planning. And so we feel like we'll be meeting both of those obligations through this process. But for me, it's school systems are really complicated organizations, and unlike maybe a private enterprise, there are, I don't want to say necessarily competing interests, but there are so many stakeholders, each of whom has a different perspective and a different stake in the work that we do. It's obvious for our students; they're here to learn. Our staff have a variety of roles to play in the organization and in their actual work with children. Our parents obviously have a huge stake in the work that we do here. Our non-parent taxpayers have a big interest in what we do as stewards of tax dollars. And you can go on and on and on about the various folks that are part of this work we do together in public education. And for my purposes as a leader of an organization like that, I would love to be able to say, these are all the things we're doing to meet the needs of all those stakeholders. And these are the dates by which we're going to complete them. This is the cycle upon which we're going to renew all that and make it ready for the next person who's going to lead for the next 5 years. So just on a personal level, that's my goal and my promise that I've made to the board. I don't know how many different times, that before I can leave here with a clear conscience, we will have such a plan in place. And it'll be one that we as a school community have created together and will shoulder together. So that's the why. We started this back in 2019. It's really, it's more and more, it's actually gone from being frustrating personally to say that, then to being embarrassing. And now I just find it kind of funny. We've been trying this since 2019. Through the notes and the work we did with a consultant early on in 2019, we just started to get underway. But at that time, we became interested in sort of expediting the process and working on visioning sort of at the same time we began doing planning. And one thing that came out of that very initial work was we all agreed that we wanted to use the portrait of a graduate for the model for that visioning process, partly because the high school is being required to by their reaccreditation through NEASC. And also several of us from Vermont went to a joint conference with the VSBA and the Superintendent's Association on Portrait of a Graduate. And that introduced us to a consulting company called Battelle for Kids. Again, more on that in a moment. So right now, we've been talking about strategic plan. I've been giving updates along the way. We've had a number of meetings we've invited folks to. We've had surveys that we put out publicly. I've made reference to this more times than I can. But what it really is we have a steering committee that consists of our 4 board chairs. There are teacher representatives, administrators. We had 2 students. We need to refresh our student representation, and we need some support. The steering committee then undertook the Portrait of a Graduate work and expanded, and we called that our design team. And so we added more teachers. We invited more folks from the public to join us. We had policymakers, faith leaders, and ultimately that group wanted more input. So we surveyed you, and 500 people gave us additional input on that Portrait of a Graduate. And then I've already mentioned the subcommittees. Those are our working groups that'll create all 4 of the component plans. And then what I shared with our staff is this is becoming real. When we're developing goals together as a board and as these subcommittees, a lot of it is aspirational, and our charge to each other was to make goals that were specific enough to give guidance, but broad enough to give latitude. And that sounds like a kind of murky charge. But the idea is that we want to be able to continue to tap the creativity of our staff and our public to develop the actual strategies that'll get us there. And we wanted room to be able to be creative within that framework. It's a timeline. It says here, commit to timeline. What is your plan to move goals in the next 5 years? So there are a lot of things that we identify as being sort of urgent that we probably want to get done within a year or so. And then there are things we know are going to take time. And so that's why we're looking at a 5-year plan. And in all likelihood, looking well beyond 5 years for some pieces of it. But again, we're dividing, parceling out that work so that it's attainable and limiting our goals and strategies to a number that is also attainable. Because we can't do everything obviously at once. So that's what I shared with our staff. And that's the really quick history. And I think I'd like to, if I can figure out the technology, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. By way of just finding your way through all the materials that we have on this, I'm not sure how many folks that are on Zoom right now are familiar with the Board Docs tool, but we have this agenda available in Board Docs so that you're able to follow along. And all the supporting documents and the slide decks and so forth are there, and including over 80 slides that take you through the entire survey that we created and all took back in June. And okay, here we go. This is one of my great fears, trying to run a meeting both in Zoom and live. I'm just not good at it, even after 3 years. Okay, I've got another document coming up, just again as more of a visual. I want to show you a timeline that's available on Board Docs as well. That kind of takes you through every meeting we've had, the dates that we held each meeting, and then whether or not the activity that was listed was actually completed. And so again, we ended our effort in 2019, shortly right as COVID was starting, or put it on hold. And then we re-engaged around June of 2021, and you can see all the meetings that we've held since then. That include our portrait. We had 4 Portrait of a Graduate meetings that were the formal design team meetings. We've had a number of subcommittee meetings and then a monthly steering committee meeting. And at the bottom are a few more to check off. I've already given my presentations to RMS, Marion Cross. And we'll be able to check off February 13th as a public forum. Okay, and I will change up and share one more document. So going back in time to 2019, this was actually kind of fun. I found this the other day. And in 2019, it's really, I think that was the last time we had the entire staff together at our October welcome back meeting. And we had a board retreat in May. We had committed to doing a strategic plan. We had procured a consultant. And we were starting the year with a big meeting with the staff to get them as excited about strategic planning as I can tell our entire community is now. But I was trying to figure out an engaging metaphor for the strategic plan work. And my wife and I had just done a hut to hut hike through a few of the huts in the Whites. And that was the metaphor that kind of struck me as the purpose for strategic planning, and also sort of its real purpose. I'm just going to scroll through this really quickly because the whole idea was where have we been? And at that time, we'd just been through a series of pretty significant leadership changes. But going back to my hiring and some of the other administrative vacancies that we'd had prior to me joining the system, we had leadership changes in multiple buildings. And at that time, when we began this process, more than half of our leadership team was new. I think Rhett was our senior, still is our senior administrator on staff. I added the items in highlighting to show that there's not a whole lot. This is a pretty easy presentation to update. A really cool piece of this is that, like, since then, we had our big pandemic interlude there, and we came through it remarkably well. And anytime you, like, in many of the strategic planning processes that I've been involved in before, there's a lot of work up front where there's a lot of data gathering, and there's a lot of group mulling over of that data. And what's really interesting for us here, and then this is something else that I shared with the entire staff, my first year here, was that we live in a place that's just immersed in education, and the people who live here and you make use of our schools, like, are huge proponents of education and extremely generous funders of education. And so our resources are more than adequate. And when you look at the metrics that define success in public school, our external metrics are so good as to be detrimental, I would argue. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a while, but this graph, I just want to put up for you to take a look at. This is a 3-year average of SAT scores in New Hampshire public high schools, and all public high schools in New Hampshire are represented here. And if you look in the upper right corner of the graph, the sole dot way up there is Hanover High School. I mean, you could basically, I mean, it's, I don't know how I feel about that. This graph, like, we should all be extremely happy and consider ourselves extremely fortunate. And that's a huge gap. I mean, we're talking standard deviation, like that kind of difference, it looks like. I mean, and it's consistent. It wasn't a freak year. It wasn't a freak 3 years. This is us in terms of the SAT, which is not just a sampling of college-bound juniors in the state of New Hampshire. It's our accountability measure. Like, each school in New Hampshire has to use the SAT as its 11th grade proof of performance. And that's where we are. So, so what that does, it's an affirmation. It says, wow, we're doing really well. Or we have a lot of students who have parents that had really good SAT scores. Without getting too philosophical about the SAT, those of you who are familiar with the test know what it tests best. And I would say that if you have 2 National Merit Scholars that decide to have children, that there's a fairly good likelihood genetically that they'll be good on that test too. But with that much of a difference between us and every other high school, many of which were located in college towns too, I mean, we're off the chart almost literally. And what that can do, though, is give us a pass. It's really easy to sit back and say, we must be doing such great things in our classrooms that we're head and shoulders above everybody else throughout the state of New Hampshire. And really, when you look nationally and compare those numbers, we're pretty darn good nationally too. We could call it a day. Whatever we're doing is working, right? But when you look more deeply, when you have that kind of a metric that everybody else looks at and says, oh, they're doing the best in the state and they're doing outstanding, it's a real temptation to not look deeper to see if there are things within our system that could be improved. And that's the kind of introspection that this process needs to generate. Just a few more random pictures of this hike, but the board set a goal in advance of 2019 to do this, to do a strategic plan. And I said to the staff back in 2019, well, we're going to take our time, a full year to plan, which turned into 3. The crossouts there, we originally thought education, operation, finance, and governance. We changed to academic, student support, facilities, and organizational effectiveness. September 30 was going to be our goal to get that much of it done. And now we're hoping to have it done in time for board approval this May. The SAU 70 meeting, I believe, is May 1st. So we're hoping to get this part done by then. There were some reference points. We talked about initial data. When we started this in 2019, we had completed a curriculum audit with the University of Pennsylvania. We were talking then about completing a facility study, which is just about complete now. And then we had a number of other activities. And when I look at them now, a lot of them are just starting to see some traction. Even now, they haven't been part of a formal strategic plan. And again, this whole notion, we pride ourselves on our democratic high school. And we have a real feel we've had ever since I got here. I sensed immediately that we had a really strong sense of trust in our faculty. There's been a lot of autonomy in the classrooms, and this effort, I think, for some people, threatens that autonomy. When really we need to take all that great creativity and that teaching talent and marshal it. And that doesn't mean micromanage it necessarily. That means we need to be pulling in the same direction. So I asked a few rhetorical questions here to help guide some of that initial thinking around the plan. And many of those questions are still ones that remain to be answered. So we're going to get there by getting this plan approved, and then we're going to achieve the plan by making sure that we hold ourselves accountable to using that as our reference tool, whether it's in the budget process, whether it's in deciding on what are the key initiatives that our school boards are going to undertake, policies that we're going to bring forward. We need to make this plan our touchstone for the work that we do together. That was Lakes of the Cloud. That's a pretty cool place. So, very long intro. And before I give a little more detail on the portrait of a learner, does anyone have any question, like whether you're online or here in our live studio audience?
Feel free to raise your hand in Zoom at this point if you want.
Any? Okay, Ferris Bueller moment.
Actually, wait, well, there is one.
All right.
Can you allow Rachel Coombs to speak to me? JB.
Let's see.
You know Rachel Coombs to speak.
Are we racing to do the same thing here? There we go.
Oh, looks like she just lowered her hand. She lowered her hand.
She lowered her hand, okay. Rachel, I'm sorry if my technical clumsiness here interred you from speaking.
Oh, she is trying to talk.
Okay.
Rachel, can you try again?
Okay, she's on. So
Okay.
Rachel, I think if you, oh, there we go.
Great, thank you. Hi, I live on Main Street in Norwich. I would love to get access to, at some point, maybe not tonight, more information about the curriculum review information with the University of Pennsylvania. I think that would be really interesting for us to just know more about what their general assessment was.
Sure, we can do
Again,
that. That's yeah.
Doesn't
Yeah,
have,
we did that, I want to say in 2017 or 18. And there's a presentation that we can put back up to refresh. And I'm happy to do that.
thank you so much.
Sure.
Thanks, Rachel.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, so back to Portrait of a Graduate, which we're already amending to Portrait of a Learner. So when we began our work with Battelle for Kids, I mentioned earlier that this is a consulting group that does this work all over the country. We embarked on a journey to try to determine what competencies we thought would be important for our students as graduates. And then from our initial meeting, we talked about the transitions that our students go through when they go from Marion Cross to RMS, from Ray to RMS to the high school, that we really thought that those competencies aren't something that are going to be solely a high school concern. So that's why the change from Portrait of a Graduate to Portrait of a Learner. And it was an interesting process. It wasn't alchemy. It was a pretty basic series of meetings where we had one meeting to talk about sort of changes in the world and changes in technology that were having obvious impacts now on education, and also creating a world in which we're educating for kids for realities that we have a hard time comprehending right now. And when you think about all the different things that are happening in our world as we speak, and you think of the pace of change, and you think of the development of technologies, it's hard, it makes my mind hurt thinking about how much more things will change in the next 5 years, let alone the next 10, 15 or so. So we went through, we watched some videos, we had some conversations and some structured feedback around the changes that were taking place. And then the second meeting, we talked about our aspirations for our kids in light of those changes to the future. So we talked about our hopes and dreams for the children in our school system. And I felt like we had some really good discussions. And I would say my main critique of the process was that in one meeting, in one night, it felt often to me like we would just start having these really deep discussions, and then it was time to go. And then we'll see a week from now or 2 weeks from now, we'll get on to the next step. So over the course of the next 2 meetings, we began to think about the competencies that we really hoped we'd be able to help our students achieve. And we had essentially a huge word bank of all sorts of attributes that you might hope for in a person. And we essentially voted on them. And we voted on them in groups, and we voted on them as individuals. And when the dust settled and we had used their online feedback tools and we reviewed all the definitions for the various competencies, we settled on 2 that across our roughly 30 people that were on this design team really rose to the top. And those were critical thinking and empathy. And I'll comment on those in a little bit, but those were like very widely selected. And then there was fractional support where maybe a quarter of the group wanted communication, a quarter of the group thought we should have creativity, and there just wasn't enough consensus to say, yeah, we should include those. And so the group felt at that point that we needed more feedback from everyone else. And so we sent out surveys, and we sent them to our staff, to our students, and to the public. I say the public. In all honesty, our public was really our parent and guardian group. And so we ended up with over 500 responses to that survey, which made the committee feel much better. And what we found in that is that as you look down through here, we had critical thinking and empathy, but then, oh yeah, sorry. We ended up also, communication rose to the top, along with the folks that had indicated on the committee that they thought communication was important. Our parents and our students and our staff thought that communication was an important focus. And what was really interesting is the students, and there were well over 200 responses to the student survey, or to that survey from students. And responsibility was really kicked up onto the list of priorities by them, which I thought was really neat. And so those four had the most common agreement for inclusion in our portrait, and those became the four that survived that process. And it was after that I was kind of reading through them, and I was really aware that this process had been done by the high school in 2014. They engaged in a strategic planning process, and I've since learned that in 2004, the SAU did some sort of mission and visioning process that yielded the mission statement that we now know as Hanover High School's mission statement. I've found no evidence that the SAU ever rescinded it, but the SAU actually adopted this mission statement in 2004. I saw Linda confirming that. And so really interesting that we talked about all of our students being given the opportunity, encouragement to use their minds, critical thinking, hearts, empathy, voices, communication. I just thought that was a really either a happy coincidence, or we just haven't changed in our thinking much over the course of the past several years. I think they're honorable aspirations for our kids, and I think of all the conversations I've had about our schools and all the things that have happened to us going back 5-6 years. And it's always that balance of academic excellence and caring, kind citizens that we're always talking about and aspiring to. And I think we caught it here. We may have missed some other competencies that are really important, and we'd love to know if you think that we have. But that's where we ended up with the portrait of a learner. And I know that council has done some work around that, and I'll be kind of going around to schools to shop this work around with our students to hear a little more about what they think before we ultimately finalize it. But this is where we landed, and I don't know, it feels like we're in concert with ourselves 5, 6, 19 years ago. So that's Portrait of a Graduate. And if anyone has any questions about Portrait of a Graduate, we'll take a few minutes here to entertain those.
Just a technical question, Dr. Goddard.
Sure.
When you're sharing your screen, it's stuff in our, for those of us who are here live, your screen is not up there. I'm not sure.
It tells me I'm screen sharing.
Second. Linda, do you have a separate question?
Well, I was just gonna say, I think if we're gonna use Portrait of a Learner, we can use Portrait of a Learner. I think going back and forth. Portrait of a Learner, they confuse people, that's all.
I agree.
Yeah, so.
I agree. And I guess without taking a vote, I think that's a sentiment that's been expressed by a number of different folks, and I'm very happy to make that change formally. I just think it's fun that I unearthed this file. Here's the note from May 10th of 2004, making that the SAU mission.
Yep.
Even with like the fancy diagram. So, nothing new under the sun. So do we have any questions online about Portrait of a Graduate?
We do have one now.
I'm sorry, Portrait of a Learner. I got to discipline myself here. It's hard to share. I can stop the share.
You make me a co-host. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. Hi, Katie.
Hi, this is Katie Kitchell. I live in Norwich, Vermont. And I'm curious, it sounds like you just said that you unearthed, some language from 2004 that is very reflective of where you got to, or it has a lot of similarities. And I'm curious about is there part of the strategic planning process that we'll be looking forward to how to hold on to the work that's done in the past and make sure that it doesn't get lost when there's leadership changes. How does one pass on? It seems like there's a theme that I'm hearing in the community that as change happens, work that's been done in the past gets lost in some way. And I'm wondering what your hopes are around that and what your planning is around that.
Katie, I'm so glad you mentioned that. There's actually a slide later on that addresses it directly. And that's back to my promise to the board. I've got about 5 years left. And one of my promises was to create a succession plan. One of the things that happens inevitably, and there's a lot of research to show that there's a big benefit to continuity in leadership. But every time here that we've had a major change in leadership, it's been an external process where we've advertised far and wide, and then had a brand new leader come in. And that's research shows that if you're having frequent leadership changes like that, it's very, very difficult to gain any traction, whether it's traction on a strategic plan or building upon the successes of previous administrations. Often goes to the wayside, and a new administration comes in and identify different priorities, and we find ourselves continually reinventing the wheel. So one thing that I mentioned was that if to get this plan and the planning process itself becomes institutionalized here, we should be people-proof. That is, if we get somebody who comes in new, and the board has a strategic plan that it is approved and essentially made the law of the land, you're hiring a new administrator to come in and execute that plan, not to just come in and discard the plan and start over again. In the absence of a plan, and when you have these major leadership transitions, it's not even a tool that I could hand to a new principal, for example, or to a successor superintendent. I won't go into the details about sort of the guidance that I received when I came here, but it was essentially that this place is in great shape. You have nothing to worry about, have fun. And there's a lot more to running a school system than that. And we right now are feeling the challenges that come when individuals leave us. And we don't have that sort of documented organizational history. I will give a shout out to Linda Dante. There are people in our community who do have sort of a long view. I would say Kari Asmus is another one of our community members who's been extremely helpful with a perspective as a former board member and an ongoing role with the finance committee. There are people out there who do know what's been done in the past and what's worked well. And I guess this is another invitation for those folks to come forward. I just feel good that we haven't strayed too far off course, apparently.
I just wanted to say I'm the co-coordinator of NEAP that we're engaged in at the high school now for people listening. And I've been involved in other NEAP self-reflections on the school, and that's another place where history is recorded. And the 2004 mission statement that was developed, that was actually a great representation of what we do in this district. I mean, it took us a year to get that statement, and there were community forums of all shapes and sizes and constant, a whole year of revisions. So it was not a short-term process. So I think that's why it has stood the test of time, if you will. But people should be really glued into the NEAP self-report. This is going to be coming out in May. And then this will continue again for 2 years. And our progress as a school is tracked and then reviewed every 10 years, which is great. I think, you have to be accountable. So we're held accountable at least there every 10 years.
Right. But to Katie's point, though, rather than me stumbling on it, we need to build a system that is that reflection is built in, and we're benchmarking our progress against those goals that we set, which is ultimately the point here. Katie, did I answer your question or adequately address your observation?
Yes, yeah. I've heard this refrain not only around, like strategic planning, but curriculum building and things like that. How, when leadership changes happen, how do we hold on to the body of knowledge that we have, and it doesn't necessarily get lost with the people who have moved on for other reasons. So thank you.
And I'd say to that example, I would say one of the primary goal for the academic subcommittee is accurate documentation of the curriculum, which was a finding. So the other person who asked about the Penn study, that was their number one observation, was just to do a curriculum audit was very difficult because of the wide variety of ways that our curriculum is documented, or the absence of documented curriculum. And so that's something that we need to make sure that we have on hand as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Sure.
Hi, Jay and
Yes.
board members and guests. One of the things that I would like to just highlight is COVID. And we all know its unprecedented impact that it had on the disruption of everything and learning. And then, as Jay was saying, with these with the leadership transitions that we had, that in and of itself, you have when a new principal and new leader comes in, sometimes it will take 3 years to reset. Then on top of that, you throw COVID in. So maybe now that we're 2 years out, people might be forgetting about COVID. Why isn't a lot of this happening faster? I am massively impressed. We opened the hybrid opening in September. We were one of the few schools. The way I took a couple notes, but I don't want to take too much time because I know we want to move forward. But I took a couple notes because I wanted to mention these things. But we provided a stable learning environment while protecting the students' health, the faculty health. We navigated distance learning. We are addressing unfinished students' learning and stress, as Jim said, all of these goals. And you think about the parents and the faculty and what the school did as a collectively, balancing the demands at home for not just the parents, but the students at home. And while you were doing all of this, you're trying to get learning, but perhaps even grieving the loss of family members to the COVID-19, the extra responsibilities during staff shortage, whereas parents at work, but even here, equity, accessibility to technology and learning. We had a lot of roadblocks, but the school and the community was, you say massively resilient is an understatement. So I just kind of wanted to reflect. I too see traction collectively, and we all should be just. I know none of us want to pat ourselves, especially in teaching or even in leadership, want to pat themselves on the back, but even the parent support. Yes, there is movement forward, there is traction. So I just wanted to take a moment to say that I am incredibly proud to be a part of this community and the school. So things are happening. So I just had to mention that. If you think about how fast we are responding and how COVID has disrupted everything. So
thanks, Patricia.
Yeah.
When I think about what everybody, and I really mean that inclusive everybody, like it was our families, it was our entire community that really made all that work. And yeah, I think we definitely need to be proud of that. And I do feel like there's opportunity now to undertake this.
Right.
To get back on this. But I also, at the same time, know that it's a fragile recovery, right? Like right now, it looks like our schools are normal to everybody, but just with our staffing issues, our people are having to do other people's jobs. They're having to work harder than they ever have. And that's invisible because everything looks great and perfect. But in fact, we've got ed assistants who are covering for teachers on a regular basis. We have schools that have more than 10 unfilled support positions. It's hard. And so to ask people for a little more bandwidth to think about planning is, I know that's going to be tricky, but we're going to be able to do it for several reasons. I feel like people are ready. They want to. They're tired of the holding pattern where we're just doing circles around the airfield. And I get a sense that people are interested now, where before it was too much to think about. I think there's also a growing amount of interest now because when people start hearing, well, the board's going to approve a strategic plan, that's when all of a sudden, especially those of us who work in the system, start to get really interested in this thing called a strategic plan. What are they going to tell us to do? And so I think there's a heightened interest from that perspective, which isn't bad either. We do need a work plan going forward. So thank you.
A lot of massively talented senior faculty who have, masters in curriculum writing, who are very passionate, but things don't stop.
Right.
And to be surrounded by, or even the new faculty come in, but there's a lot of mentoring and teamwork. It's an incredibly special place to be. So yes, things are moving forward.
So if there aren't any more questions or comments on the portrait of a learner, the other thing was really interesting is as our subcommittees did their work, they came to the same sort of sense that the design team did with the portrait work, that we wanted more feedback. We weren't getting people showing up at board meetings saying, hey, how's that strategic plan going? So we decided it was time to make a survey. And then of course, each subcommittee wanted to get certain information. Since you're doing a survey, Ben and his team on the academic subcommittee were kind of spearheading this effort. And then everybody else decided they'd like to get a little bit of information as well. And pretty soon the survey sort of swelled. And how many items ultimately, Ben? Yeah, how many items do we ultimately have?
47.
So 47 survey items covering a really wide range of stuff. And that was this past June. So obviously circumstances are a little bit different, but we thought it'd be worthwhile for you to have an overview of that survey data, to hear what your neighbors and friends and our staff and our students had to say. And so do you want me to share a screen? Sure. Let me navigate to it first.
Jay, while you're doing that, how do you want to handle questions from audience members?
So it's going to be a lot, but we'll definitely leave time at the end of the survey discussion. And then if a hand goes up, if you feel compelled up in on our Zoom audience, if an item comes up and you'd like to ask a question during the presentation, if you raise your hand, Ben, you can decide if you're at a point where you can take that question. Sure. Let me just get to that point. All right, so here we go. Ben, it's all yours. All right.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, right. Share it, right.
And also, someone has asked if the meeting will be available to watch later. This is being recorded, and we will send out a link to that eventually. And all of the slides from the survey are in board docs as well. So thank you for your question.
There you go. Okay, so 503 responses. Sorry, I said 500.
Thank you, Jay, for that introduction. We did have 503 responses back in June of 2022. The survey was sent out by Jay to parents, staff, as well as the local community listservs. And additionally, we got several comments from people who self-identified as students. It was open for multiple weeks until July 1st, with multiple reminders from Jay to our email listserv. It was 47 items, as he mentioned, and in total, parents, I say parents, I mean the community, spent about 130 hours answering the survey, which if you put that into more appreciable context, that's more than 3 work weeks of parent time. So we really appreciate all the feedback. We got a lot of great comments, both long and detailed. Additionally, we invited parents to put in their personal information and be contacted and actually have a discussion with the superintendent and his staff if they so chose. 40 people identified themselves as part of that, and we met with each and every one of them in the summer, throughout the summer and fall of 2022. Jay, it's my understanding that we're going to have school-specific findings and PowerPoints at some point later on.
Yes.
That will occur at each one of those schools. The things I'm about to show you include all 4 schools put together. The items included 12 free text response questions, and I'll summarize those shortly. And we talked about a little bit and also redacted those that we needed redacting to eliminate potentially identifiable information. You want to keep going? So these are the 12 questions that had free text responses. And you'll notice that the number of responses, that there were 2,250 free text responses among 12 questions. And among those, the actual wording of the question is, do you have anything to add or anything we don't know? And a lot of people answered no. So we took those out just to shorten the document a little bit. And in terms of specific responses that addressed some sort of comment besides no or none or none of the above, we got just shy of 1,400 among those 12 questions, ranging from 65 to 100 and something. So we're going to go over this fairly quickly for the sake of time, but if you want me to slow down, and I can see already for the folks in the room that a lot of this is not legible. Jake, you scroll down the next one. A bigger font. Folks in the room, can you read that?
Yes.
Thanks, Rick. Jake, can you kind of just zoom or fill out your screen? That's it. Yeah, I see folks in the room are shifting and sitting right in front of each other. Read that PowerPoint. Okay. So the first question, and again, I'm going to kind of be a little fast for the sake of time, but feel free to slow me down, anyone, is which current aspects do you value the most about our SAU schools? The top choices were in order. Overwhelmingly, number 1 was teacher and staff quality, where over 80% of all our participants said that that was one of their highest values, followed a little bit by quality of curriculum and instruction. Does that help a little bit?
Person, I can't quite get it out.
Yeah, I have to read your screen. Followed by the triples down a little bit to access to student support services, as well as social cohesion and connections, and then followed by some other things. So Jay, can you scroll down? Yeah, really hard to really get at.
Sorry.
I also want to mention that I crafted the initial wording of the survey. It was vetted and added and edited by all the board chairs, and we sampled it a little with members of the community who were survey methodologists and experts. So I put in this document a sample of both comments that I consider to be positive and negative responses from participants. All of the comments we got, which is approximately 90 pages long, we will provide to the community shortly. And it has been partially redacted in places where identifiable information was had by Jay and myself working in tandem. So some positive comments about aspects that were valued by the community is some of the teachers are life-changing for the students. And I really value the culture of caring and community and the thoughtfulness that goes into considering the needs of all students. Conversely, we got negative comments such as much as I want to choose all of those, none are true, all caps. And academic excellence is very important and currently lacking. So people were not afraid to speak their minds, which we really appreciate. This is not meant to be a ding on anyone responding. This is to get a sense of the level of feedback we got. Our next question was, what are the biggest current challenges adversely affecting quality of life in our schools? A lot of choices here, and you can see on the top 2, a little further ahead of everyone else, is the balance of time spent among academic, extracurricular, family, and personal activities, as well as student mental health and wellness. Notably, the third choice is everything feels just fine. which a survey like this, where you get as one of your top 3 answers, everything is just fine. You can read that in a couple of ways. You can say, wow, that's our top 3 answers. We're doing an incredible job. Or you can flip that around for those who can read the percentages, that it's less than 20% say everything is just fine. Or you can flip and say 4 out of 5 people are saying everything is not just fine. So just like Jay was talking about, we have to make sure not to get complacent and to keep always trying to improve ourselves. A couple of additional highlights I want to point out is we often get dinged by the community rightly or wrongly. It's either having too much rigor or not enough rigor. Those are separate choices here. And for those who can read the print, not enough rigor was actually commented more often than too much rigor. That's a question where if you think it through, there's some high deviation among which school we're talking about. One school says there's way too much rigor. I think we all know which school that probably is, but just to make it clear, it's the high school. The elementary schools much more likely to say there's not enough rigor. So we hear that, and we will get to that in school specific comments. Some sample positive and negative comments on the challenges are, thank you for including lunchtime in the schedule. For those of you who have not been at the high school for too long, that is actually somewhat of a new change, which I still think is insane. Some folks love the counselors and the therapy dog. On the other hand, like someone in the audience mentioned, lack of curriculum and limited opportunities for advanced work are not available as much or are hard to find. And to please work on mental health, specifically at the high school. Seriously, this is urgent. Keep on going. Then we put a lot of 3 choice responses where we had sort of a bam, bam, bam intent of what do you think about this issue? Is it just right? Or is there too little of it, or too much of it? So on the graph, you see that in this slide, and several boards follow, you want the middle one to be as high as you can, and the other ones to be as low as you can in an ideal world. So for the intensity of our academic focus, about a little over half say it's just right. Healthy proportion saying both too little and too much for academic focus. In terms of the intensity of extracurricular activities such as athletics and theater, just right is almost 3/4 of folks saying that's just right. And again, a smattering of too little and too much on both sides. Here that gets a little bit of a variance from the bell curve, the intensity and pressure to succeed. Less than half say it's just right, and almost half say there's too much pressure and intensity to succeed. That said, we still have 30 folks who say it's still too little intensity and pressure to succeed. If you're paying attention to the numbers, which are on the far right, in terms of a response rate, a sample size, if you times that by roughly 3.5, that's how much you get across all of our schools in terms of number of students. The amount of regular homework, again, just right, just under half, and about 1/3 say there's too much homework, but about 1 in 6 say it's too little homework. Thank you. For time availability for the playground or recess or recreation, etc., just right, about 2/3 of parents feel that way. A little under 1/3 say there's too little, and you got to feel for those kids who have 12 folks who say there's too much recess, too much intensity, but those folks are out there. Time availability for lunch, kind of the same thing. Almost 2/3 say it's just right, over 1/3 saying there's too little time for lunch, and a smattering of folks saying there's too much time for lunch. And again, we'll give school-specific graphs like this at a later meeting. For parking access and availability when needed, 4 people said there's too much parking access, but mostly it's just right and a lot of too littles. We hear you on that, and I personally hear you on that as well. In terms of DEI efforts, that was a big discussion at the time back in the summer. It still is today. And in terms of the amount of efforts we're putting into it, just right is well below half. It's about 44%, with over 1/3 saying there's too little DEI efforts and almost 20% saying there are too much DEI efforts. For our sustainability efforts and environmental efforts, just right, over half, too little, about 1/3, too much, about 4%. And again, as someone already mentioned, COVID has kind of been forgotten about in terms of a lot of our collective conscious. It was much more of an issue back in June. And about 2/3 of folks said we were doing just about the right amount of effort for mitigation efforts. About 1/4 said it was too little at the time, and a little under 10% said it was too much. We're going to get some variance on this selection. For general communication from the schools, about 30 out of 4, almost 75% of folks said it was just right. About a quarter said it was too little, and 9 people said there was too much communication from us. And we appreciate getting that feedback. For COVID specific communication, it went down a little bit, but it's still about 2/3 said it was just right for the level of COVID communication from the schools and staff. About a fourth said it was too little, and 7% said it was too much. Now, hear you most, there's a big change here from the typical bell curve. And this is the first one where just right was not the plurality. Too little communication from the schools and staff specifically about your child had over half of respondents, including me when I filled out the survey. And almost half said it was just right. And 4 people said it was too much communication specifically about your child. In terms about the accessibility of the curriculum, again, a big healthy portion of too little, 41% said there's not enough accessibility of the curriculum. One person said it was too few access, might be a typo there. And 60% said it was just right. For the availability of additional academic assistance, which we meant to say things like summer school, after school help, and within school help, about 61% said it was just right. Over a third said it was too little, and a handful said it was too much. For the effectiveness of that assistance, it was 2/3 just right, a third too little. So that was a lot of things we threw out very fast, and we got a number of comments about that whole series. Some of the positive comments were that the assessments and oversight and discussion of results, as well as the implementation of support is exceptional. We've had wonderful help from the school and communication, so we may be biased in thinking that it is great. Conversely, we got comments that there was lots of communication, but not actual information being passed, which I thought that was a good comment. And that there's not enough focus on effective curriculum development and holding classroom teachers accountable for executing that curriculum. And there's a lot of variance between classrooms in the same school and same grade. There were a lot of similar comments, similar to that one. The next question was about the current most pressing academic needs within our schools. Jake, can you do it on the next one? Thank you. So the top one, as we've already discussed, was a consistent standardized curriculum between schools and within grades and subjects, followed closely behind by optional after-school academic availability, smaller classroom sizes, and everything feels just fine. Again, academic rigor was one of the choices, that it's not too high up on the priority list as voted on, either for not enough rigor or too much rigor. And then there are a few other things too. We got some sample comments here on the academic side of things, such as our experience with the teachers in the race school has been phenomenal. At each grade level, the teachers have been wonderful and amazing, inspiring. Our child could not be more excited. I appreciate the school's progressive homework policy and emphasis on well-being, but we need more instructional time. There's a lot of fluff and lots of comments about the new math curriculum. The next question was based on student support and service needs. This is the social support committee. They're high up above everything else was about more focus on stress management, feeling valued, and non-school life preparation, and more focus on mental health and related wellness, with a smattering of other things. If you're keeping track of everything feels just fine, it is all the way to being 7th place for this one, indicating there is a lot of things we can work on as a community and as an administration. Same slide, just putting hard numbers on it. We heard that student support services are exceptional, in my opinion, administratively, especially with ed assistants and one-on-one aides. And there was an issue where there was bullying, and the teacher and school's response was phenomenal, as well as the counselor. Everyone should get a raise. Conversely, we got
Seriously.
Conversely, someone told us to stop coddling kids. You are creating a generation that lacks resilience and will struggle in life as a result. On the flip side of that, we had several comments relating to the pressure that kids are getting either from teachers or from the community or putting on themselves, and that it's heartbreaking. We don't need a pressure cooker. And I really like this quote: just because you get an A rather than A+ doesn't make you a failure, which we all have to keep in mind. We had a question about specific concerns for your specific child during the school day. And notice for this one, everything feels fine was our number one, which is great. But it also shows that roughly 2/3 of people did not put that as one of their top 3 choices. Separate from that, the top comments were social intensity or pressure, academic intensity or pressure, and struggles with a specific subject. One thing I want to note is consistently in last place on this type of question was school-related physical health concerns, which is something that we want to always keep working on, but it was the least concern on these questions. Some free text responses we got included, the school has been amazing about specific learning disabilities, having great teachers and finding more great teachers, but we also heard about cliquishness, as well as boredom, lack of challenge, and my child's disillusionment with school because of lackluster, unaccountable teachers. So we are doing the best we can in all these, and we wanted to highlight that sometimes we're getting polar opposite responses on the same issue or same subject matter. For concerns for your specific child outside of the school day, top two by far and ahead were a virtual tie between not getting enough sleep, everything feels just fine, and a little bit after that, enough time for homework. Probably not too many surprises there. I think we all could use some more sleep, but we have to feel for those students. We had several comments about wanting to have the school day start later and end later, specifically at the high school. That said, we did get a few saying school starts too late. I'm not going to comment on that one. We got some comments about doing a great job staying open during COVID, and we are fortunate, but we see more needs for high quality, affordable, and nearby after school care. It's been hard to have play dates and meet families. There were several comments about that, especially for new parents in the early stages of COVID. Lots of pressure to do lots of extracurricular activities, which are often stressful and expensive. There's a hard balance, and it affects people if they're not participating, as well as the stress, which I certainly understand about my kid has a runny nose. Is that COVID? Is it not? Do they go to school? Do they not? That's the right thing to do there. In terms of the physical environment, the top choices were more outside education, as well as improving indoor air quality and security measures, and everything feels just fine. We have done lots of work on that for the specific to COVID, which I can't attest to that specifically, but I know we have administrative folks who can. And we are working on the outdoor classroom stuff. And security measures are, we have several things in place, but for security reasons, we often don't go into public. We'll get into specifics about that, but we have many things that are there. High schoolers should get outside too. And the health and safety elements are being managed beautifully. But that said, we got a lot of comments about our athletic facilities. Drop off and pickup are often challenging, especially at the high school and the elementary schools. And some of you may have heard we have some septic issues. I paraphrased about 30 comments into the one who just had one word, septic, exclamation point. I believe Thomas heard about that as our Norwich chair, so I'll leave that be. In terms of comments specific to the transportation, arrival, and departure, we hear a lot about this from parents at meetings and with emails. That said, it is good to hear that everything feels just fine as our top category. But again, noting that 70% of people did not choose that as their top thing. And other issues were including not enough parking at the schools. Schools should start later in the day, and we need different, more environmentally friendly buses. We do an amazing job coordinating transportation. The bus drivers are wonderful, but on the other, we get comments and complaints about specific bus drivers and the amount of time it takes to get to school, and the schools all starting at the same time, as well as people wanting a later start time. In terms of sustainability, not too much of a majority here. A lot of things of interest, including increasing renewable energy, preparing for and adapting to climate change, reduced energy consumption, and reduced waste generation. It's always good to try and find ways to help conserve. School values these things, but we got several specific comments and just a smattering of examples, including not using single-use cutlery, a lot of paper coming home. Where are all the solar panels? Why do you have gas buses and not electric buses? There's too many kids driving by themselves and septic. This one had a lot of comments on it. The question was, what are the most important large-scale initiatives in the next 5 years? And the top choices with a lot of variants, including introduce and expand additional practical subjects for study, such as driver's education, business education, and family consumer sciences, improvements to the existing buildings and grounds, school-sponsored sports and after-school activities, specifically at all the schools besides the high school, and before and after childcare at MCS and Ray. Notably, none of these seem important, either for budgetary reasons or everything feels just fine, were very minor, less than 10% specific to this question. And for this one, because it was more of an open-ended, what do you think we should do? There weren't really many positive or negative comments. It was more just many great ideas. We had about 100. And there were too many put there, but we will be releasing the full PDF shortly. We also had some demographic questions that you can kind of see who people were. The vast majority had children in the schools, a handful of people whose child were not old enough yet, or never and not anticipated, which were mostly staff members. In terms of the breakdown between schools, it roughly emulates the actual population counts of those schools, where Hanover High is the biggest school, Ray Elementary is the second biggest, and then Marion Cross and Richmond have very comparable numbers. And again, the no child in the schools was mostly staff. Where do you live? It's about 2/3 Hanover, 1/3 Norwich, again, kind of roughly where our children live, as well as tuition students and employees. And no one filled it out who declared no current connection to the SAU 70 schools. That was 0. As we've commented about Hanover and Norwich having a focus on education, if you add up the masters and doctorates together, about 86% of all of our households have at least one of those in the household. That is obviously skews us from other communities and is something for us to note. We did ask about income and the breakdown. You can see the bell curve there. Our median income, assuming I'd rather not say, is back up the rest of the community, between 200 and 300,000 was our median. Again, that makes us a little different from a lot of other communities. It's something we need to keep in mind. And about a fourth chose to not answer the question. Keep going down to the next one. In terms of self-declared race ethnicity for your child or yourself, if you do not have a child in the schools, a little under 3/4 identify themselves as white or Caucasian. 13% said I'd rather not say. You can see there were 4 other categories ranging from less than 1% to about 10%. Ethnicity is a separate question. We were trying to emulate within our counts roughly what the census does. And here about a little over 80% identify themselves as not Hispanic or Latino. Can you go down the numbers? About 4% identify themselves as Hispanic or Latino, and 15% said I'd rather not say. For the gender of your child, slightly higher females compared to males, 43% versus 41%. About 3% were identified themselves or their child as non-binary, and 13% were I'd rather not say. And that was all of our survey questions. So we threw a lot at you right now, very quickly for the sake of time. All of these slides are online. Our 3 text answers redacted are going to be available soon. Does anyone have any questions on those or needs me to go back to a specific slide? Either in person or on Zoom, please raise your hand. Jay has his hand raised. What's up, Jay?
First of all, I want to thank Ben for all the work he did on this, both on the front end and as well as the analysis afterwards. There's a lot more. It's been disaggregated 10 different ways for each item. And as the schools begin their more granular planning process, we were able, because of the way Ben has coded the data, to pull those relevant pieces out. And the one difference in particular that Ben noted was this idea that some people think there's too much rigor at their school and others think there isn't enough. And that really does break down very clearly by school. So we can get that data to the right teams that will be working with it. So, and I have to say the feedback we got through this survey is Ben already did a presentation to the steering committee, then it was disseminated to our subcommittees, and so they've actually already used this feedback in revising and refining their goals, and as importantly, the outcome measures that you're going to learn about in a minute. And any additional feedback we get, we plan to treat with the same respect. So we'll inform you about how you can provide us with more input shortly. This is the period of time, unless there are any more questions.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Oh,
Sorry,
sure.
Wendy Keller Ellsberg. I live in Norwich. I have 2 elementary schoolers at Mount Marion Cross and then a high schooler here. And you may have already answered this. First of all, I just want to say thank you. That was a very impressive set of data, and it did speak volumes about the quality of instruction across the district and the quality of people's satisfaction with it, and really, I'm really just impressed and think it needs to be said. How amazing that is. Not that there are no problems, but just the dramatic amount of accomplishment that's built into it is reflected there. Thank you. You may already have answered this, but is there the disaggregated information by school? Is that going to be shared with the public, or when you said that was going to the appropriate places, is that more of an internal discussion?
It would be both.
Yeah.
So it's going internally already. In terms of public presentation, I think the plan is we're gonna do that at each school, physically at that school. Where there'll be a separate meeting where we invite parents and all that.
And is that planning to happen
yeah.
sometime in the next few months, hopefully?
Yes.
Yes. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And Wendy, the other thing too is, I want to throw a little caveat in there. If we're in a situation where we disaggregate the data and then we realize that that there might be demographic information or something that will really pinpoint certain students or families, we'll have to think about that more, like whether it's something we can redact or if it's even easy for people to guess.
No, of course. I was more thinking about things like the priorities, like what it is that parents would like to see happening in the schools, that kind of.
Sure, yes, absolutely.
And in terms of the free text comments, like I mentioned earlier, that was about 90 pages long. And Jay and I have already redacted it so that there'd be, as far as we can tell, working together, there's no possible way to identify an individual student or parent or teacher within that document, which we'll send out, I'm assuming, very shortly.
You clearly worked many, many hours on this project. Thank you.
I think Jay and I met in person. I think we had 5 2-hour meetings.
Yeah.
About the survey.
Thank you so much.
Sure. And another question?
My name is Dr. Ingram from Hanover. I just have a question. Have we looked at this data before? Just because COVID was maybe clouding the picture with some of the responses. Do we have anything to compare, let's say, a couple of years ago?
So that's a great question. In terms of a repeating survey, this is a survey that we took point on this year as part of our strategic planning. Our goal, at least my goal, speaking for myself, is to have similar surveys with repeating questions year on year so we can track how we do over time. So that gets back to the sustainability question that someone else asked about. We are working on that, and we intend to have sort of the demographics and how we're doing well during the school day, like repeating year on year with occasional topical news of the day type questions as needed.
Yeah, and Beth, the other thing that we're looking at is, well, there was a large scale survey done like this when the high school did its strategic planning process. I can't remember if it was completed in 2014 or if that survey was administered back then. I reviewed that survey, but we didn't use it as a comparison point. And that was targeted specifically at the high school. And to Ben's point, we're looking at revising the way we send out survey after survey after survey for a variety of different things. And we have policies that dictate that we survey parents and staff about our principal evaluation process, the superintendent evaluation process. And I'm really thinking that if we create more of a general satisfaction survey and have items on there about each of those, we could probably survey parents once a year. And just make sure we're getting the data that we want. Yes.
Yeah, we also need to do that. I always forget the name of it, maybe someone remembers. We used to survey our graduates, and that was great data that we used, yeah, and that was very helpful. So, because once they're out of college, a lot of times you get the same baby back on what they got or didn't get, you know.
Right.
That's very helpful for you.
Yeah, I need to work with guidance department to figure out whether that's still happening or how we're doing that.
I don't think we're doing it.
That is really interesting data to use, and then I get asked for it a lot, actually.
Saying that, I wanted to mention one thing when I was listening to some of those points and comments that I think a lot of people forget that not all of Hanover and FL have fiber optic cable.
Mhm.
So although the school has done, and I'm one of those people, and I'm one of those people, the school has done. I've been here, but I don't know, various capacities over like 12 years. In the last school, I've seen a significant change of most everything has been digitized, especially since COVID. But that said, there are still some families who do not have reliable internet, or if it's Starlink, it goes out, and then probably those same families, and I am one of them. Dave, the 2 hour delay, the one that we had, I almost did the Zamboni to get on my driveway at 10. So, yeah, it's just, we're not, the community is not quite there yet in terms of internet accessibility, but
We'll get there, hopefully.
hopefully.
We have a comment from a member of the audience. Jennifer Rickards is letting us know it's difficult to hear our in-person audience members, so any future comments, if you could just come closer to the owl so that the people that are on Zoom can hear you, that'd be great. All right, and thanks, Jennifer, for letting us know.
Any other questions specific to the survey, either in person or online?
All right, with that, Ben, I'd love to give you a break, but we're gonna have each of our chairs who headed up the subcommittees give you a sense for where that level of planning is going. And the first one up is Academic Curriculum Subcommittee, and that's Ben.
All right. So this subcommittee consisted of myself, Hanover School Board Chair, our Assistant Superintendent, Robin Steiner, each of the 4 principals from our schools, at least 1 teacher from each school. And that's about it. And several other staff members. And so, and I think we're going to see a trend here with the other chairs, that we have an aspirational goal statement, sort of overarching overarching goals, as well as specific goals for each of those items. Oh, thank you. Let's see if they can. I got it.
Very good.
So in general, our goals surrounded curriculum, instruction, assessment, and professional development. And we heard folks loud and clear on the survey about the importance of having a publicly available, full online, searchable curriculum. And that is goal 1, bullet 1, and several other similar ones surrounding the curriculum, including templates and similar language across all subject matter as appropriate, issues around equability and viability, implementation and sustainability for how we see this year on year. Like someone asked a great question, what do you do year on year? We want this to be a moving document, and there are ways that we can kind of get at that through self-evaluation on a yearly basis. In terms of instruction, we want to develop current instructional practices and methodologies, both to document what we have, as well as develop ways to make it better, again, in a public fashion. We are going to start using instructional coaching and peer observation. It's going to be fairly new to us across all of our schools. That's part of our evaluation committee work, which we've also been working on concurrently for a couple of years, increasing the use of different modalities across all classes as able to help all of our learners who learn in different ways. We want to support that and not push people down into one, kind of putting a peg in a square hole situation. Similar things with assessment, including developing a system for the secure digital collection of these data and other data, creating multiple types of assessment, making things as student-centered and balanced as possible, as well as empowering our staff to seek and get the professional development that they need and develop their own strategies based on established best practices and align it with what the school and the individuals involved want to do. So the specifics are on board docs. I don't want to bore you with the line by line for several pages.
Sure. We are getting feedback already.
Yes,
on
we are.
these. And so the educators out there in the audience, when we say best practices, we have a lot of folks that have already asked the question, which best practices? So that level of planning will be what happens next. You already went through the goal 4 piece?
I believe so. Professional development.
All right, so Lisa Christie and Rhett Derrick had spearheaded the student support subcommittee, and Rhett, you can kind of take us through that.
Yeah.
Great.
So we met 4 or 5 times across last spring and this fall. Now we had one community discussion in May of 2022 to additional feedback. Our members included school board members, school counselors from the various schools, myself, coordinator of student services from Marion Cross, 2 students of middle school and high school age, a coach, and we have a community mental health provider as well. And really our initial task was to try and come up with what do we mean by student support. And we kind of came around to all things that are non-academic, that are a part of the student's life as a student. And so looking at athletics, extracurricular, co-curriculars, programs for students with disabilities, physical and mental health and wellness, and it got really broad. And so we try to balance that by going really deep initially, which was a mistake. And so we need to do these specific things at this school and share with all students this program. And we found a balance eventually, which brought us to our goals. Again, looking at higher level goals for schools for that implement. And I think what was helpful for me to think about is when you look at some of our report cards now for our elementary schools, they have things like learning behaviors or work habits. They're not reading, writing, math, but the other aspects of what it takes to be a good student. And so being respectful, being able to self-regulate, cooperating with others. Those are things that we're more explicitly teaching now as part of our school. Elementary schools have responsive classroom, PBIS, as well as advisory. So we're embedding a lot more of those social, emotional, student support, full student aspects to our program. So goals that we.
I just want to point something out, Red. I wanted to call you folks out as the overachievers of the group who actually took the time to link your goals to the portrait of a graduate competencies. The rest of us will do that afterwards.
So the goals that we came up with that all school programs, academic and otherwise, are accessible to all students. So not just academics, but also like facilities, co-curriculars, ensuring that what we teach in our classroom has multiple means of accessibility for students who have print disabilities, dyslexia, ability to access the same text as traditional readers. And provide purposeful and intentional social emotional learning, as well as mental health and physical wellness. Third, just ensure that our policies and procedures, this is a school board and district wide endeavor, that they all reflect on the social emotional needs of our students and have review, ensure we're staying up to date with best practice. And then we're building collaborative and community connections. One thing that came out of our meetings were we have our walls in our school that students are living at home with their families, they're part of religious communities, like sports. It's a much larger community than just the school. And so reaching out and connecting with community mental health providers and other people in the community that can both benefit our school, but that our students want to be benefit to. And so forging those connections, whether that's through experiential learning opportunities, high school like an extended learning program, and bringing people into the school and also having ourselves out in the community.
Great. And I see you have quite a few outcomes.
That's where, yeah, and there were more, you narrow them down. But those are really, again, those will be our measures when we look at for schools. How do we want them, how do they want to implement these goals that we've developed?
Right. And just to be clear, this team went ahead and actually had recommended strategies. So they started doing the work that we're going to be doing next at the building level. So we didn't throw that away when we made the document uniform. We just took those off and set them aside. So we'll make sure to return those to their owner.
We had representatives from each school, so they were eager to say, "Oh, we should do this." And
Yeah,
we had to.
no, it's good.
We're looking big right now. We're
Right.
into the details.
But you're ahead of the game, so we'll expect that you're ready in like early April instead of May 1st.
Lots of things to be excited about.
Yeah. All right, Tom.
Well, it's hard to follow some of the achievements. I did lead the facility subcommittee. Lead is too strong a term because we had a very good, strong subcommittee, which was made up of folks from across a number of different areas and had some there's support from other board members, who have been here included, Garrett Fong, who was there also in this capacity as the chair of the President Advisory Committee, obvious reasons, and then Jamie Teague, obviously, is the administrator and overseer of so many things I can't even name in here. Tony Daigle, head of facilities, and then a team member, John who has expertise also as a head of facilities down at Simon Pierce. So a bit of a smaller group, but a really good bunch of folks who have vast expertise in this type of area. And we've already spoken to a lot of things that showed up in surveys and more than just separate idea notes came up. We took a broad overview of the facilities and grounds throughout the district here and came up with 4 goals. And the overarching idea too that comes out in the measurable outcomes, I'll address in here too. But with our 4 goals, we focused in on the curricular and extracurricular needs within the district and how the facilities and grounds can help to achieve those. Obviously, in this area and throughout the world, there is a need to embrace sustainable measures, which was very much at the forefront of thinking when we were going through our assignment of the goals here. There's a need to ensure that upgrades are tied to budgets, and then creating a safe, secure, and healthy environment surrounded after the facilities going. We realized early on though that it has been such a long time that we've done any strategic planning throughout the district here that we definitely needed to conduct facilities audit that was across the district, taking into account everything we've done at all 4 schools. Otherwise, we would have that much of a record with Lexington here, where there would be individual niche interests at each of the various schools. I think it's one that has some separate needs that others don't necessarily have to address at this point in time. But that facility audit has actually almost been completed, is my understanding. I have not been briefed out yet on the results of the audit, so those are coming soon, and we're starting to get briefed out to our administrators here, and that's going to provide a tremendous amount of information that will help us prioritize what is on there here. In terms of the measurable outcomes, we went back to a lot of the things that the board members, community members, and administrators here knew to address, and was reinforced by what we found in the results of the survey here. Our measurable outcomes in goal 1 include adequate space to provide meal preparation and dining needs. We have needs in those areas both here at the high school and over here in Parksville. A lot of the results in terms of what we just gone through is reference to COVID and our experience with the pandemic. Adequate spaces throughout the learning playgrounds. A need for we've been very fortunate in this district to keep up student populations, and that we need to continue to meet student capacity needs as the district stays at regular enrollment rate and growth in the future. Technology needs, which have already been referenced, both here in schooling, this one across the district in terms of networking and the types of technology we're able to provide our students and our faculty and staff. And then, as came up in the reasonable access to parking, we just only a concern across the district. Sustainability, obviously referenced earlier, and I think the 3 of the questions that we had in the survey here will help us better understand how you can approach that. That is going to be something as well that comes out of the facility budget, because of the specific reference that we requested of the auditors to look at the best way to take time, sustainable options that we need forward, and to consider the needs of the district, whether it's building out the playgrounds, whether it's enhancing kitchens, or whether it's looking at transportation needs that we can do better to reduce our carbon footprint there. And I think one of the biggest things that this is going to help us from my personal point of view is how we look out for the next 5 to 10 years on how we address the biggest facility needs, because as we've all in this here, I think we've been doing much more reactive planning. And we look at things like the turf field that we've replaced here, the track and the baseball field that are going to be underway over the course of the summertime. the septic over at Marion Cross School, hopefully with one article that's on this year's town meeting day ballots and things like that. And what this is going to help us do is see what we need over the next 5 to 10 years. And it's also going to be nice, it's going to coincide with the rolling off of a lot of debt that is coming to a conclusion in the next few years, I believe. As the big debt that has been on the district works with regard to the work here at the high school and the building at Richmond Middle School allows for some more strategic thinking, planning for the facilities, planning with these next period of time. And then the fourth goal is just to make sure that we're keeping up with our state and system audit and regulation. I think that really rounds it up. There's a lot coming, and that's pretty exciting too, to see if you can do and improve upon our facilities.
Great, thanks, Tom. And just be assured that the results of that facilities condition assessment are in. There's one more piece that they're doing, which is a sort of a space utilization component. So my guess is that within a week, we should have that completed.
Yeah, I think the silver lining too, if there is one of the 10 minutes too, we really did get ahead of some of these things like the outdoor learning spaces. There's a lot of great work that's already been done over at Marion Cross School and across the district. We've benefited from the HVAC throughout the school. So we've got a little bit of a jump start there, but I think it's going to be nice to hear what next steps are recommended and audit.
That's great. So Rick, you get to bring us home.
So I led the organizational alignment and effectiveness committee with Jay and Jamie Teague and Amy Pullman, who's our HR rep or HR
Coordinator. Yeah.
coordinator. And we're kind of still waiting for the other groups to finish up. We're kind of the skeleton that everything else hangs off of. So we're not as far down the road. We kind of know where we want to go, but we're waiting for the details from the other groups. Our aspirational goal to ensure that the leadership, governance, financial, and administrative function of our organization support the attainment of the academic, student support, and facility goals established in this plan. So we're looking at administration will review and align all our structures and processes to improve efficiency and effectiveness. Our HR department will support the continuous improvement of our organization through recruitment and retention of highly qualified employees. We'll improve our community and stakeholder engagement. Financial and asset management will support the implementation and attainment of all our goals. And then our goals are listed here. Board meetings will be more focused and efficient. That's kind of my #1 goal. Board, central office, and school administration initiatives will be aligned with strategic plans, goals, and will have specific strategies, outcome measures, and budgetary consideration. We're going to get a legal review to take a look at our governance structure to see if we can streamline it and make it more effective. As many people probably are aware, we all sit on 3 school boards. So we sit on the Dresden School Board, Hanover School Board, and SAU School Board, and Norwich sit on the Norwich. So that's 3 meetings a month, plus all the other committee work. So we're trying to figure out how we can make it a little more streamlined, maybe cut down the number of meetings we have to attend. We're going to look at leadership development and succession plan to ensure that as people leave or retire, that we don't come dead in the water. We have a couple key individuals that work at SAU that if they left, I think we all recognize we'd probably be in big trouble. So we're trying to figure out how we can ensure that doesn't happen. We're looking to increase our diversity, stability, and job satisfaction. Trying to maintain our accurate job descriptions and document ongoing operations and procedures. We're going to try to engage and expand our communications beyond our regular school board meetings, trying to figure out how we can be creative to get input from our towns, our parents, our students, and any other potential stakeholders, plus our staff and our faculty. And then financial and asset management will be aligned with our goals. Our building staff will develop continuity plans and provide appropriate cross training in our business office. will be reviewed and optimized.
Not too much. No. All right. So thanks very much. So that's it. That's as far as our proposed draft goals right now. I mean, notice documents. That's where we are right now. And so our idea is to, again, subject these goals to scrutiny, whether it's from students, parents, the general public, and really hammer them out. But I think the important thing for us all to keep in mind, I think, Tom, you mentioned it, this is what we're putting on paper right now, and circumstances can always change. And if this process becomes institutionalized, the contents of that process can change to meet new circumstances. So this kind of leads us into the wrap up here, which is that we do still want public feedback. And so, yes, Linda.
Oh.
Not right now, though.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I've been just dying to ask this question because I'm here at the request of the environmental club in the high school. And they have been chomping at the bit to get involved with the audit and what's going to be happening at the high school. And I know, Tom, you know this. And I promised I'd ask this question because they're looking for when their best entry is into the conversation. I'm sure as many others are. You know, so I think some thought about that. They're not going to go away, but they want to be there in a timely way to help sort of, you know, work with. And they have a climate action plan, and they're thinking about toilets and disposal of waste and everything else. So, and the septic system where they have presented.
So thank you very much. And you can assure them that their climate action plan was actually requested by the folks that are doing our net zero audit.
As well as survey. People took the survey and said, where is it? What's going on with the CAP?
Yeah. So essentially this meeting is that kickoff. It's like, okay, so once we get these broad goals, we're going to need your students' help to figure out how we get there. And so the process at the building level, developing strategy, is going to be where those concrete action steps are developed.
Thank you.
Sure.
We also have a question from the audience. Jocelyn, can you unmute yourself and go ahead?
Hi, this is Jocelyn Meyer. I live in Norwich on Beaver Meadow Road, and I have 2 children at Marion Cross. Thank you for this incredibly comprehensive presentation. It's unbelievable how much information and thought has gone into this. So I just wanted to appreciate all of the effort and how detailed this presentation has been. I wanted to maybe just lift up an issue that a broad-based issue and then a smaller issue that several people in the room I've spoken to them about, but I'd like to understand better like how diversity, equity, and inclusion are being built into the outcomes and goals. I know that was highlighted as a question on the survey, and I feel like it came up in very subtle ways in the goals and outcomes, but not in a very explicit way. And so I would like to better understand like where it appears within the goals and outcomes, and apologies if I missed it. And then, you know, as I've spoken to Jay and Tom about one particular diversity, equity, and inclusion goal that is of importance to me, and I'm not sure if this is the right place to mention it, but I'll throw it out there for consideration. Is just the school calendar and the fact that the school calendar for SAU does not reflect the diversity of our community. The school calendar really only observes Christian and national holidays and doesn't reflect the range of religious and cultural holidays that our community observes. And so that leaves families like mine and students feeling excluded or minoritized, and misses opportunities to teach other students in the community about different traditions and different faiths. So there are many other ways in which diversity, equity, and inclusion appear and can be brought into our community. That's just one that that I'm citing as an example and of something that is particularly important to me. But I would love to see diversity, equity, and inclusion appear in other places as well. Thank you.
Jocelyn, thank you so much. And you're doing exactly when you asked me, I think early on, like how you could get involved, this is it. And I really appreciate you keeping those concerns in the forefront of our consciousness. And there are places where things like calendar will be discussed and will be part of this planning process. And the other thing I encourage you to do is to search our equity policy. Because the strategic plan isn't the be all end all. We haven't been sitting idly by while we wait for this process to unfold. And there was a great deal of work that was done to actually develop an equity policy. And part of that policy is that there's a reporting requirement, actually on my part. And there's also there's a mandate in that policy for us to identify practices that are not culturally responsive and then work to remedy them. So there are a couple of different angles on that. And in terms of the language of the goals, like I'm about to share a link that's attached on through board docs to a very simple, a very basic Google form that'll allow people to give some feedback and also to identify themselves if they're interested in being involved in any of our the committees we have going now or the committees that will be launched at the building level. We'd love to have a list of folks that are willing to lend their time and expertise and just your opinions. But in the goals themselves, when we were trying to come up with the terminology for the academic goals, for example, we knew we have our equity policy already at our disposal, and we phrased those 4 goals using well, in curriculum, we said ensuring equity, and we use the term all students intentionally in the most inclusive sense that will engage all students, that will meet the needs of all learners. We will empower all students and will empower staff to meet the needs of all students. And so that's how linguistically we decided to make sure that we were maximizing our inclusiveness. And then the same thing for student support. There are probably more specifics under student support. And I think you'll also see language, and it may seem maybe a little subdued, but in the portrait of a learner, we had lots of conversations about equity and diversity and inclusion. And we didn't just use the stock definitions that were given to us by Patel for Kids. We went through a process of attempting to make sure that language met our needs. And we had made a commitment early on in that process that we were going to keep diversity, equity, and inclusion on the table in all of our deliberations. And I feel like we did a good job. And again, we have a tool in our bag, in our policy manual right now that holds us accountable for ensuring that we do just that we keep an eye on equity in everything we do.
And also, Giles, when we released the individual free text responses, there were several great questions or answers, many of them several paragraphs long about the issue that were from all sorts of different perspectives and were great comments. I encourage you to read those when they're publicly available shortly.
Great.
Any other questions? Yeah, thank you, Jocelyn. Any other questions from folks in the audience or on Zoom? Yes, please.
I come stand here.
If you don't mind, thank you.
I'm
Oh, you
trying
can,
to
you can stand. You
position
can stand.
myself.
Oh,
There we go.
the camera will now adapt to you.
There we go. Okay, I'm Wendy Keller, from Norwich again. My question is about the broad structure of the discussion and these 4 committees that you all formed. I think it might not be the right word. I'm actually thinking specifically about the interplay between student support services and academics. And my question is, when it comes to children who learn very quickly in a particular area where differentiation is needed, but not to add supports so that they can understand or access the curriculum, but instead to maintain a challenge for them, does that fall more under student supports, making curriculum accessible to students, or is that more of an academic thing? And to just add on to this, one of the topics I've been very interested in recently is about how a really robust, challenging curriculum can be made possible by a really strong multi-tiered system of supports, so that if we do have the capacity to support children who need that extra help with learning in whatever regard, that might also allow us to have a challenging and robust curriculum. Sometimes I worry that those two things can be pitted against each other, or can feel like it's really hard to do all of it. So I just wanted to throw that out there for that discussion, like what is the root dynamic in your thinking about keeping a robust curriculum and also meeting the needs of learners who need extra support. Thank you.
So Lenny, thank you. I feel a little bit like you an audience plan, but just well, I just wanted to say, like I said before, like people haven't been sitting idly by while we're waiting for us to get going with this planning process, and we've had several folks very recently participate in an MTSS training. For those of you who aren't up on your education acronyms, it's multi-tiered systems of support. I don't see those things as butting up against each other, because we're going to maintain our steering committee. The function of that steering committee moving forward is going to be to make sure that the goals and the outcome measures that we have for each of the subcommittees don't conflict. So we'll be making that turn. So far, it's been processed and trying to get all this stuff down, and that committee will be a standing committee, and I see it being more of an accountability group, like moving forward. But my hope would be that we maintain that committee, and that becomes every bit as important as things we do like CSDC, which is our committee that oversees staff development. There could be no committee, I think, more important than making sure that we're actually meeting the goals of our strategic plan. So,
And there are a number of topics that kind of dance between these, like when people ask about the later school start times, that's a little bit academic, a little bit facilities, a little bit social emotional learning. And the steering committee helps us hone in on those issues when there's not necessarily conflicting, but more several aspects that we can focus on. And there were several comments in the survey that sort of addressed the different tier system, both pro or against. A number of people said something that they'll bring back gifted and talented programs, or whatever they're called these days. A number of people saying we need more honors, we need less honors. It's putting too much pressure on it to even have something called honors in the first place. And many comments and several different perspectives on that, many of them polar opposites. And I don't want to keep harping on the point, but I really encourage everyone, the programs included, to read all the comments we've got, and they are going to help shape our opinions in for years to come, probably.
So it's exactly 8:30. I know we started late, but doesn't mean we can't finish on time. The next steps for the 16 of you that are still online, and those of you who are here, and anyone you can tell, recruit. There's a Google form. You actually have to get on Board Docs. As it stands now, there's a link on where it says exit survey. Hopefully that works. Again, I don't claim to be a technology expert, but I put together the form and I set it up so that people outside the organization can get to it, I hope. On that form, we're looking for some general feedback about the strategic plan, and then some little more specific about items that you think should be kept or considered, maybe aren't necessary. But then beyond that, there's some questions about whether or not you'd like to be involved. There's a place to put your contact information. And we will get in touch with you if there is a specific part of the plan or a committee that you're interested in helping with.
We got one last question or comment from Tracy, who says, a big thank you to everyone on the various committees. Your work is appreciated.
Oh,
Thank you, Tracy.
I want to thank all of you. It's not until we put this together and just presented this, it doesn't seem like we've done that much, but it's been a lot of hours of meetings. And it's been a long time. So thank you all. We don't need a motion to adjourn. We can just leave.
Everyone get out.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for those of you on Zoom, and thank you.
You.
It's out there.
That owl is screaming.
That's the way.
I just noticed myself like staring at it. There it goes
And
again.
then.
I was so tickled to find that SAU document.
And then once you actually.